Once upon a time, in a quaint little town tucked between the hills and the forest, there stood a small bakery, one that was renowned far and wide for its irresistible bread. Each morning, before the first light of dawn broke through the sky, the smell of freshly baked loaves wafted through the cobblestone streets, waking the town from its slumber. The bakery, with its warm golden glow and baskets filled to the brim with pastries and bread, was the pride and joy of its owner, Mr. Bernard. Mr. Bernard was a quiet, hard-working man. Though his face often wore a serious expression, he was known to be fair and just, though strict when it came to business. He had lived alone for many years, having lost his wife long ago. The bakery was all he had, and he poured his heart into it. He knew the value of hard work, and he expected everyone to earn their keep. Yet beneath his stern exterior, there was a softer side to Mr. Bernard, one he rarely showed. One chilly autumn evening, just as Mr. Bernard was preparing to close up his shop for the night, he caught sight of a small figure lingering near the window. At first, he thought it might be a stray cat, but then he saw the outline of a child, her face half hidden in the shadows, staring hungrily at the bread on the shelves. The little girl was frail, her clothes dirty and torn, her face smudged with dirt. She pressed her nose against the glass, her eyes wide with longing. For several moments, she simply stared, her small hands clenching and unclenching nervously at her sides. Mr. Bernard, from behind the counter, watched her with a furrowed brow. He recognized the look in her eyes, a look of desperation. He had seen it before in others, but never in a child so young. Before he could speak or offer any help, the girl glanced around furtively. Then, in one swift movement, she dashed into the bakery, grabbed a loaf of bread from the counter, and sprinted out the door. For a moment, Mr. Bernard was too stunned to react. His shop had been robbed, but not by a crafty thief or a cunning bandit, by a child. Recovering from his shock, he hurried out the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Hey!" he shouted into the night, but the girl was already darting down the street, her small figure disappearing into the gathering darkness. Determined to catch her, Mr. Bernard gave chase, his heavy footsteps echoing against the stone pavement as he ran through the town's winding alleys. The pursuit led him to the edge of town, where the houses were old and crumbling, and the streets were narrow and dark. It was a part of town that few people visited. A place where the poorest families lived, barely scraping by. Mr. Bernard's anger began to fade as he realized where he was. His breath heavy, he slowed his pace, scanning the streets for any sign of the girl. Just as he was about to give up, he caught a glimpse of movement in a narrow alleyway between two dilapidated buildings. He crept closer, and what he saw stopped him in his tracks. In the dim light of the alley, the little girl was crouched on the ground, tearing the loaf of bread into pieces. But she wasn't eating it herself. No, around her were three smaller children, even younger than she was, their eyes wide and hollow with hunger. The girl handed the pieces of bread to each of them, her own hands trembling with exhaustion. The children devoured the bread hungrily, their small bodies trembling as they ate. Mr. Bernard stood frozen in place, his chest tightening. The girl wasn't a thief, not in the way he had imagined. She wasn't stealing out of greed or mischief, she was stealing out of necessity, out of desperation. She had stolen the bread not for herself, but for her siblings, all of them gaunt and starving. The smallest of the children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, clung to the girl's side, his eyes half closed as he chewed on the stale crust she had given him. The other two were slightly older, but still painfully thin, their cheeks hollow, their skin pale. As Mr. Bernard watched, something inside him broke. He had spent years building his bakery, working hard to ensure he had enough to live on, but he had never known this kind of need. He had never gone hungry, never had to wonder where his next meal would come from. And now, here were these children, huddled in an alley, doing whatever they could to survive. The little girl, her back turned to Mr. Bernard, suddenly tensed. She must have sensed his presence. Slowly, she turned around, and when she saw him standing there, her face went white with fear. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to. We were so hungry." Her words came out in a rush, and as she spoke, she instinctively shielded her younger siblings with her arms, as if expecting Mr. Bernard to lash out or take the bread away, but Mr. Bernard didn't move. He stood there, his stern face softening as he took in the sight before him. His heart ached for them, for the little girl who had been forced to become a caretaker at such a young age, and for the siblings who depended on her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, glancing at her siblings as if unsure whether to answer. But then she whispered, "Lily." "Lily," Mr. Bernard repeated, kneeling down so that he was eye level with her. "Why didn't you come to me and ask for help?" Lily looked down, ashamed. I didn't think anyone would help us. People don't care about kids like us." Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if she didn't believe her own words. Mr. Bernard's heart shattered at her response. How long had she been carrying this burden, thinking she had to fend for her siblings all on her own? How many nights had they gone to bed hungry, too proud or too afraid to ask for help? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You don't have to steal," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid. Come with me, all of you. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Lily blinked in disbelief. "But we don't have any money. We don't have anything." "You don't need money," Mr. Bernard replied, his voice firm but kind. "What you need is a full belly and a warm bed. And I'm going to give that to you." Lily's lip quivered, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The fear and exhaustion that had been etched into her young face began to melt away, replaced by something that looked like relief. With gentle hands, Mr. Bernard helped the younger children to their feet, guiding them out of the alley and back towards the bakery. As they walked, Lily couldn't stop glancing up at him, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone was helping them, that they didn't have to run anymore. Underscore 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 underscore. When they arrived back at the bakery, the warmth of the fire greeted them like a long-lost friend. Mr. Bernard ushered the children inside, setting them down at the small table in the corner while he hurried to the kitchen. Lily sat nervously, her siblings clinging to her, still unsure if this kindness was real. The smell of bread and soup filled the air, and their stomachs growled with hunger, though they didn't dare ask for more. Lily's hands shook as she tried to comfort her brother, her eyes darting anxiously toward the door, half expecting Mr. Bernard to return and tell them to leave. But when Mr. Bernard reappeared, he carried with him bowls of steaming soup and slices of fresh bread. He set the food in front of the children with a gentle smile, urging them to eat. At first, they hesitated, unsure if it was really meant for them. But once Lily took the first bite, the others followed, and soon they were eating as if they hadn't seen food in days. Mr. Bernard watched them with a lump in his throat, the weight of their struggles heavy on his heart. How had it come to this? How had these children fallen through the cracks, left to fend for themselves? He couldn't stand the thought of them being alone any longer. "Where are your parents?" he asked quietly, not wanting to frighten them but needing to understand how they had ended up in such a dire situation. Lily's spoon paused mid-air, and her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed far too heavy for a child her age. "They went to the city to find work," she said slowly. They said they'd come back, but it's been weeks. I don't know where they are. I don't even know if they're alive." Her voice wavered, and Mr. Bernard saw the weight of responsibility that had been thrust upon her far too early. She had been forced to grow up overnight, to become the protector of her siblings, and now, she was so tired, so scared, but she had no choice but to keep going. Mr. Bernard felt a surge of compassion that nearly brought him to tears. He had spent his life working hard to build something for himself. But these children had been dealt a hand of misfortune that no one should ever have to face. "You won't have to worry about that anymore," he said gently. "From now on, you and your siblings will always have food, and a place to stay. I'll take care of you." Lily looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But why? Why would you help us?" Mr. Bernard knelt down beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Because it's the right thing to do. No one should have to go hungry, especially not children. You're not alone anymore, Lily." For the first time in weeks, Lily felt a glimmer of hope stir within her. The constant fear, the gnawing hunger, the endless worry about her siblings, it all began to fade, replaced by a sense of safety she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. In the days that followed, Lily and her siblings became a part of the bakery's daily life. Mr. Bernard found small tasks for them to do, and in return, they always had a warm meal and a safe place to sleep. The townspeople soon noticed the change in the bakery. It was no longer just a place to buy bread. It was a place filled with the laughter of children, the warmth of family. Lily, once a scared little girl stealing to survive, blossomed under Mr. Bernard's care. She learned how to knead dough, how to bake, and even how to serve the customers. And as the days turned into weeks, she realized that the bakery had become more than just a place to stay, it had become a home. As for Mr. Bernard, the once stern and solitary baker, he found himself with a family he never expected. The children brought joy and purpose back into his life, filling the empty spaces in his heart that he had long ignored. He became not only their guardian but a father figure, someone they could rely on, and in return, they gave him something he hadn't known he needed, love. And so, in that small town, under the golden light of the bakery, the little girl who had once stolen a loaf of bread found not only food and shelter but a family and a future. And from that day forward, neither she nor her siblings ever went hungry again.